Okay, so what we're trying to do with this piece of work is actually ask a question. Obviously there's the Paris meeting coming up, and there's been a lot of other meetings and keynote reports that have happened over the recent decades. At the same time that we know that we are changing some features of the Earth system. We know that atmospheric greenhouse gases are continuing to rise in the atmosphere. These timelines, so plots against time of how these changes occur or the meetings, are available in various forms. What we've tried to do here is put the two together. Now the question we want to ask in this is it the case that there's been many meetings at international levels with heads of state, and yet emissions are still going up and warming is still continuing, and hence this is a rather unfortunate reflection on the success of those meetings? Or are we actually in the opposite situation? There's now unprecedented interest in this issue, and that's good, and when we compare it against the changes in the physics of the system, we can be confident now that this unprecedented interest is going to raise a real drive to keep climate change constrained, for instance within the 2 degrees warming level since pre-industrial times. Okay, so when we consider these plots, in this diagram we have the change in atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases, of which carbon dioxide is the dominant one. In one of the other panels we have the amount of warming that's been recorded since pre-industrial times. Now the warming is going on. We do know there has been quite significant levels of global warming. That doesn't imply a causality between global warming and the CO2 concentrations, the changes to atmospheric gas composition. But in a sense that's what climate research is all about. And so far it has been very, very difficult, admittedly based on a lot of different computer modelling to some extent, but also looking at ice core records, various other records. It's been extremely difficult to explain the warming that we've seen as a potential natural cycle. So all the indications are that there is a correlation between the amount of CO2 that we end up with in the atmosphere, the amount of warming that we witness, and that has led the IPCC, which is marked as the top 5 quotations on this timeline diagram, increasingly strong statements that there is an attributable link between anthropogenic emissions of fossil fuels and global warming. Okay, so on the second panel in this diagram we have not only atmospheric CO2 concentrations, but we also have the cumulative emissions of fossil fuels. In other words, the total since pre-industrial times to now. Now this is a very interesting metric that's gaining a lot of interest. There is a strong link between the cumulative emissions, total emissions, and the amount of warming or peak warming. So we can relate that to future emissions by adding them all up, historical emissions, and come to some assessment of whether we're likely to cross over the 2 degrees global warming target. Now this commentary is operated in parallel with a special issue by Environmental Research Letters that pick apart that metric. The reason that metric is of such interest is it very easily allows us to get and characterise the generational issue. In other words, the less that we emit in this generation allows more what might be essential emissions to survive for future generations. So it captures this issue of our behaviour now. How will that impact on generations ahead? And that is the brown curve in the second panel of this multi-panel diagram. Okay, so perhaps almost as a slight novelty, in the bottom panel we look at the number of times the words climate change or global warming appear in research paper titles, but also appear just in the text of books in general. So obviously there's going to be a lot of technical books out there discussing climate change, but it does also suggest, a very, very rapid growing interest in this subject, and I think, that's to be encouraged and is encouraging in its own right, because it suggests we're taking seriously a potentially serious issue. Okay, so just to summarise, again, the usual procedure of writing a paper or even a commentary is to provide an answer. In this instance we have provided a question. Again, is it the case that we have many, many more meetings, yet CO2 continues to increase? Are there many, many more meetings, grounds to be optimistic that we're going to resolve and avoid potential dangerous climate change? I think that this meeting is a very exciting meeting in Paris. It is where people are bringing pledges of their emissions into the future and how they plan to decrease them. It raises hopes that we will be able to contain climate change within bounds that don't become dangerous, But hopefully there's also a realism in there that so much of the economy depends on burning fossil fuels. And I think it's always worth remembering that climate change researchers do recognise the other side to this debate. Would I attempt to answer my own question? Well, that's probably not fair to do that, but there's a little bit of me that thinks that humans, incredible ability to resolve problems, and that it may well be that the Paris 2015 meeting is the marker beyond which we finally manage to deal with this issue.